From the moment the lunch rush began, it felt like the air inside the small-town diner carried a tension that didn't belong there, like a storm waiting to break loose. Emma Brooks had felt it before, the sting of unkind eyes, the weight of whispered judgments, but she never imagined today would carve itself into her memory with the sharpness of a blade. She balanced a tray of plates in her hands, forcing a practiced smile as she moved from table to table, hiding the exhaustion behind her eyes. But when she heard the first cheap remark thrown at her from a corner booth, something inside her snapped, not in anger, but in a deeper, colder way, the way a person breaks quietly after trying too long to stay collected. And just when she thought she'd have to endure it alone again, a man she didn't know, a single father simply stopping in for lunch with his young son, stood up as if his instinct was wired to protect people who didn't deserve to be hurt. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for others, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts. Emma had been working at Mapleview Diner for just over 2 years, ever since her life had swerved off the path she once thought was secure. She was 28, steady, responsible, and far more hardworking than she ever received credit for. Life had taught her to swallow pride when needed and smile through shadows. But lately, work had become more than just tiring. It had become a place where strangers felt oddly comfortable stepping over boundaries. Maybe it was because she was quiet. Maybe it was because she was gentle. Maybe people sensed that she wouldn't fight back. She didn't quite know. That day, the diner buzzed with chatter and the metallic clinking of dishes. Outside, an early summer breeze swept through the parking lot, brushing warmth through the windows. It should have been a normal day, just like all the others she endured without complaint. But sometimes the smallest cruelty has the loudest echo. A group of young men, locals she had seen before but never served without discomfort, sat in their usual booth near the window. They had already made a few comments when she walked by, but she ignored them. It wasn't worth stirring trouble, she told herself. It never was. When she returned with their drinks, one of them muttered something about her appearance, something meant to degrade, to humiliate, to reduce her to nothing more than an object for their amusement. Another guy laughed, and though it wasn't loud, it pierced through her composure. Emma's breath hitched, but she remained steady. She always did. She didn't let her hands tremble. She didn't let her eyes betray her. She simply placed the drinks on the table and turned away, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. The moment she walked off, they said more. Louder this time, crueler, cheap words meant to provoke a reaction, meant to bring her down just because they knew she wouldn't cause a scene. Behind her, she heard it all, each syllable embedding itself like a bruise she would carry home. That was when a man from a nearby table, someone she hadn't even noticed arrive, stood up without hesitation. His name was Daniel Hayes, a 32-year-old single dad who carried himself with a quiet strength, the kind that didn't feel the need to announce itself. His little boy, Evan, sat across from him, swinging his feet idly under the table, unaware of the sudden shift in atmosphere. Daniel didn't raise his voice, didn't posture aggressively. He simply stepped forward with a protective presence that instantly silenced the cheap laughter. The young men straightened, surprised, maybe even embarrassed. Something in Daniel's demeanor, calm, firm, unflinching, made them rethink their cruelty. And though Emma didn't hear exactly what he said, she felt the shift, felt the sudden wall of safety forming around her. But she didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want gratitude to fall awkwardly from her lips. All she could do was breathe and hope her eyes didn't well up with the emotion that threatened to rise out of her chest. When the men eventually left, the air felt lighter, like someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. Emma moved behind the counter, taking a moment to steady herself. Her heart still beat too fast. Her hands still felt cold despite the warm day outside. She'd been dealing with unwanted remarks for years, but somehow today's sting felt sharper. Maybe because she was tired, maybe because she was lonely, Or maybe because kindness felt rarer than cruelty these days. She wasn't used to someone stepping in for her. She wasn't used to being noticed that way. Daniel approached the counter after finishing his meal. He didn't look like he wanted praise or recognition. He didn't act like a hero. He just seemed like a man who believed that hurting people was wrong, no matter how small the wound might appear. His son tugged gently at his sleeve, pointing at a cookie in the display case, and Daniel smiled softly before paying the bill. Emma thanked him quietly, her voice softer than she intended, but Daniel simply nodded, almost as if he understood how heavy the moment had been for her. That evening, after her shift ended, Emma walked home feeling drained. She lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a place that was modest but peaceful. Hardwood floors, pale curtains, a thrifted couch she'd bought with her first paycheck at the diner. It was her safe haven, even on the nights she cried quietly after long shifts. She sat by her window, letting the breeze brush against her skin, thinking about the stranger who had stepped between her and cruelty earlier that day. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel invisible. But she didn't expect to see him again. The next morning, though, Daniel returned to the diner with Evan, this time for breakfast. Emma's heart fluttered unexpectedly when she saw them take a seat near the corner, away from the noise. She wasn't used to feeling seen, and part of her wanted to hide. But when she approached their table, Daniel greeted her with a polite smile, and Evan grinned shyly, clutching a small toy car. Throughout the morning, Emma found herself glancing their way more often than she should have. Daniel was patient, attentive, and kind, traits she rarely witnessed in customers. He asked about her day without prying, spoke with warmth without crossing boundaries, and treated her with a respect she had almost forgotten she deserved. His presence felt steady, grounding, like something she didn't know she needed until it was there. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Evan visited more frequently. Sometimes for breakfast before school, sometimes for lunch on quiet afternoons. And slowly, subtly, Emma found herself opening up, not in big confessions, but in small smiles, light laughter, and gentle glimpses of a softer side she kept guarded from the world. Daniel never pushed. He never asked for more than she was willing to give. He simply made space, quiet, safe, unspoken space, for her to exist without fear. For years, Emma had been convinced that being alone was easier. She'd been hurt before, abandoned by someone she thought she'd build a future with. After that heartbreak, she'd stopped believing that kindness could be genuine. But Daniel's presence began to challenge those beliefs, like sunlight seeping through cracks she thought were permanent. But life had a way of testing fragile beginnings. One evening, during her closing shift, the same men who had harassed her weeks earlier returned. Their presence alone made her chest tighten. She prayed they wouldn't see her. But they did, and this time their words were colder, sharper, carrying the same venom as before but with a new edge, as if they resented the fact that someone had protected her. Emma tried to ignore them. She tried to focus on wiping down tables. But when she stepped outside to take out a bag of trash, they followed her. The parking lot was quiet, lit only by dim streetlights. She heard footsteps behind her and felt her pulse quicken. She didn't want to be afraid. She didn't want to show it. But she was. She was terrified, and before she could retreat inside, a car door slammed in the distance. Daniel had just arrived. He had left his wallet behind earlier and had returned to pick it up. When he saw what was happening, something fierce flashed across his face. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply walked toward them with a protective intensity that made the men step back instinctively. Maybe it was the presence of a child seat visible in Daniel's truck. Maybe it was the realization that this was a man who had responsibilities, who wasn't looking for trouble but would not tolerate injustice. Whatever it was, the men left quickly this time, muttering under their breath but unwilling to push further. Emma stood frozen, her chest tight, hands trembling. Daniel approached her gently, not crowding her, not overwhelming her, just offering presence. She couldn't hold back anymore. The tears came, Quiet, painful, years in the making tears, and Daniel simply stayed beside her, letting her breathe, letting the fear unwind from her body. That was the night everything changed. In the days that followed, Daniel became more than just a kind stranger. He became a steady presence in her life, someone who understood loneliness, who understood responsibility, who understood what it meant to protect without expecting anything in return. Emma grew closer to Evan too. The little boy adored her, and she found herself smiling more often because of him. Slowly, quietly, Emma began to heal, and Daniel, patient, gentle Daniel, became the unexpected anchor who reminded her that she deserved to feel safe, respected, and seen. Months passed, and what began as quiet glances turned into a bond strong enough for Emma to let herself believe in hope again. Daniel didn't save her. He simply stood beside her while she learned to save herself. And that, she realized, was the truest form of protection. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these emotional stories alive. Special request. Before you go, comment kindness always wins if you believe good people still exist in this world.